Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Uh, this is a sessions we are going to be talking about trust. Uh, there is a correlations between uh, trust, trusting societies and prosperity. I think it was a book that was written in 1995 by Francis Fukuyama. Uh, it relates that trust is being the essence of having prosperity. So, as a country, as a growing nations, that's something we hope to be able to build, build a better trust between public and private. And with me this afternoon, we are very fortunate to have Mr. Polman. He was a CEO of Unilever from 2009, 2009 to 2019. During his tenure at Unilever, he managed to, by far, managed to have superior financial return to the shareholders. If you compare to the FTSE index and Unilever stock, I did my research. It outperformed more than double. So it was an amazing performance that you have done during your tenure at Unilever. But what is so amazing about Paul is that financial return is one goal, or I don't know if that's the goal, but that's the outcome. But he has a goal, an ambitious goal. The goal was to improve health for more than 1 billion people, reduce the environmental impact of products by half, meaning recycling and all this. And also enhancing or enhance livelihoods of millions of people in their supply chain, farmers and all of these things. So when he retired from Unilever, his work in helping other businesses to transform and imagine how to eradicate poverty and inequality, and also help how to manage the out of control climate change. So he also wrote a book. I mean, for those that have not read his book, it's called Net Positive. So he captured a lot of his ideas into that book, and he is making this as a movement for all of us. So doing well and doing good. So please join me here, give him a big applause, Mr. Paul Polman. So I want to discuss about how the private sector, we can build trust. Trust to the customers, trust to the suppliers, our suppliers, and trust to our employee, and also, most importantly, trust to the regulators and governments. What do we need to do to be able to build trust?
Yeah, that's obviously a very broad question, and thanks for the introduction once more. But, you know, they say about reputation, it comes on foot and it leaves on horseback. How long it takes to build and how quickly you can lose it. And it's probably the same with trust. It's very hard to build because it's actually driven by behaviors, not by what you say, but by what you do. I always say to people, like corporate cultures is a function of values and behaviors. Many companies, great values. You enter their lobby, big statements on the wall. But then you see how actually business is handled, especially when there is pressure, sometimes short-term pressure or crisis, ideal moment to test if the behavior actually matches. And then what you see most of the time, that it unfortunately doesn't. Now, trust is, and more so lately actually than before. Now, trust is very important in society. First of all, Edelman issues every year what they call their trust barometer. And it shows, frankly, that trust in governments, in the press, in institutions, in business itself is relatively low. In fact, only about 25% of people would actually trust. Business a little bit higher than government or press, but nothing to be proud about. And yet, the trust is so important. We were talking over lunch. If you look at the valuations of companies, if you go back about 30, 40 years, most of the valuations of companies were a result of what accountants were telling you were the assets of a company. Assets minus liabilities, that's sort of the value of the company. There was a little bit more on top of it, but not much more. And it would explain about 85% of a company's value. Now, if you do that same exercise, it explains about 15 to 20% of a company's value. The other 80% we call goodwill, we call intangibles, but it really is trust. It really is trust. So how do you gain trust? You gain trust by giving more than you take, I would argue. You gain trust by being part of a broader solution than your own self-interest. You gain trust by, if you are in business, by taking responsibilities of all your impacts. In our book, we ask a very simple question. How can we profit from solving the world's problems, not creating the world's problems? That question might have been less relevant when the planet itself could compensate for a lot of our shortcomings. Mother Earth was very forgiving when we were 3.5 billion people and didn't consume that much. You know, the forests would absorb the carbon we would put in the atmosphere. The oceans did part of the job, and so forth. Unfortunately, with 8.5 billion people and a consumption pattern that has gone absolutely skyrocketed over the last 4 or 5 decades, Mother Earth has run out of steam and increasingly sending us our invoices to the point that we are now if you look at the health of this planet, which really decides our own health, we have exceeded 6 of the 9 indicators of planetary health. We're very close to negative feedback loops. And the cost that we're incurring is pretty high. So my argument in the book is, indeed, it is the private sector that decides in most countries how the economies are going to do. It needs to be an integral part of the solution. So it should profit from helping solve these problems, not creating these problems. And I think companies that take responsibility for their total impact in the world, companies that set targets in line with what science demands and make them public and hold themselves accountable to that, companies that embrace partnerships to solve these bigger issues, engage in positive advocacy versus lobbying, all these type of hallmarks are companies that build trust. We saw in GlobeScan, which issues a yearly trust barometer, that Unilever, and I'm not saying that for Unilever's purposes, but when we were starting to operate under those principles, was a strong purpose to improve the lives of 1 billion people, as you say, that our trust that we had in all the different stakeholders in society actually was off the charts, higher than companies like Patagonia and some others that you would expect to be in the top. So society notices that, and as society notices that, you actually enlarge the possibilities of being successful in business. If your trust is high, more people really want to work with you. You have better relationships in your value chains with your suppliers. Your communities will fight for you, and so forth. And that's really what we would call this multi-stakeholder model that we would be advocating for.
Yeah, they say that when an organization is a trusting organization, meaning that employees are being trusted, empowerment works, and companies would be able to grow and scale up much faster. And so the context of trust is actually not just customers. You mentioned about environment. You mentioned that you would be able to attract workforce easier because making money is not the only objective. There is a bigger objective in their purpose of life, and they like to connect their skill to what it's needed by the societies. So that connection would make job more fulfilling, and that's the reason why you said your workforce is very motivated.
Yeah, I would say, first of all, starting with, you mentioned a few things there. The first one is making money is important to keep your business going. I understand that. And you need to invest and you want to expand. So it's an indicator of success of your company, but it can be just a purpose. So it's a little bit like white blood cells in your body. We need white blood cells to live, but we don't live for white blood cells. So profits is a result of doing something successfully. But if you end up with a lot of money and the wealth is gone, so what is the purpose then? When you can't breathe the air anymore, when you can't grow food on the land anymore, when you can't have drinking water anymore coming out of your tap. So profits is an indicator of something bigger, which we call purpose. For business, that means to profitably address the issues of planet and people. So it's something bigger than yourselves. That motivates people. They want to be part of that. In Unilever's purpose, which was making sustainable living commonplace, we saw that we moved from the middle tercile of engagement to the top tercile. We became the third most looked up company in LinkedIn for employment after Google and Apple. So something's happened. Then you look at the reality in society, engagement at work of all companies. If you read any Harvard business study, it's about 20%. Only 15% of people in the US find their bosses being moral leaders. So think about the price you pay by having that lack of trust, that lack of respect. Think about the flip side of that, how much value you could unlock if you built that. When I had the discussions with the financial community during my 10 years as CEO, they didn't quite understand what we were doing in our business plans, because for some people that's very soft, that's hard to understand. But it's in fact the essence of what you do, to unlock that human potential, to let everybody reach their fullest potential, whatever they set for themselves as goals to do that. And for that, you need to create that environment, which you call trust. And for that, you need to run these companies with a higher level of purpose. I have a hard time understanding, if I would be a CEO of a company, a family-owned company, like you find a lot in Indonesia, or a publicly traded company that I was running, that I would earn a lot of money by making more people miserable or pushing them into poverty, or making or squandering the world's scarce resources and stealing that from future generations. To me, that doesn't make sense to make money that way. I'd feel very miserable by the time I knock on this famous gate when my time comes and have to explain what I did. It's certainly not very something to be proud of if that's the way you earn money. There are better ways. And the good thing now is that the interests of shareholders are increasingly aligned with the other stakeholders if you run a long-term business model. And the reason for that is because of having waited so long to address these issues of climate change or of food insecurity or of biodiversity destruction, we are actually incurring costs that are much higher by not addressing it than what we would have to spend to solve it. And that's probably true for most businesses. It actually pays to run your business without waste. It actually pays now to run your businesses with green energy. it actually pays to restore biodiversity on which we all depend, including any business model. So if we can make more businesses, more business people aware of the opportunities that are being offered, then I think you'll see more pivoting to these more responsible business models, which then is an integral part of building that trust, which is lacking in society.
Yeah, you mentioned about family business. Most of us in Indonesia, including myself, I'm second generation of family business. And, you know, family business tends to look long term. You know, it's generation to generations. So most likely, supposedly, family business would be look at sustainability, right? I give you an example of my own situation. And actually, I would want to say that sustainability is a self-interest in a way that is self-profiting interest. Because if you are looking at the long term, if you are not looking at the short term, if you are looking at the long term, sustainability is for your future. So the example is that, you know, we grow pineapples and we use underground water to irrigate. And over the years, you have to dig deeper and deeper, and it costs more and more energy to suck those water for irrigations. And that's not sustainable in a way, because it's just going to not just take the water, it's end the water there, and you can't grow anymore. So, and it's also economically more expensive. So what we do is that we build lagoon. We have about 300 lagoons or so today. And it is actually cheaper to use that solutions. So family business supposedly think long term, because we want to be in the pineapple business for 100 years or 200 years. It's not that short-term mindset. But the publicly listed companies, they are on the short-term mindset. How did you manage to talk to your investors that would be?
So the reality is, if you look at the world, most of the publicly traded companies owned by shareholders, many of these shareholders are institutional investors. They're actually our pension funds, your and my pensions. So they actually are long-term. They're not as short-term as people may think. And they understand that it's not only to get a good return over time so that you can retire, but they also understand that they have to retire in a world that they can live in. Because these funds have become so big, think about State Street, Fidelity, BlackRock, the Japanese investment fund, they actually don't make their returns anymore by stock picking. They actually are more interested in having these overall economies work than individual companies. So they're actually your biggest advocates to do the right thing. So then you say, where does the short-term behavior come from? Because definitely there is increased short-term behavior. I actually think it comes from the companies itself and their leadership, from their boards, from the CEOs. And to some extent explainable, when you have a crisis in the Ukraine, when there is a president who gives every day another direction of where the business goes, when you have the climate disasters hitting your value chains, when you have pandemics like COVID, it gets you pulled down to the here and now. You can hardly breathe, and you're happy if you survive the next quarter, the next quarter, the next quarter. So it takes leadership, actually, and it takes providing that space. Now, of course, there is a small group of investors that are short-term, that are focal. They might be activist investors that just look around and try to earn money the best way they can, and they don't really care about your companies. But you shouldn't react to that too much or make that the dominant force. Then you say privately owned companies are longer term. It is true they're longer term. They think multi-generational. But what the statistics globally show is that because they don't have to publish, yeah, they reinvest their money in their business. They spend more on R&D. They have a higher capital spend. So they actually protect their businesses for the longer term, but they are actually less environmentally friendly. And the reason is because they're not held to account. They don't have to publish. So you have this transparency that drives behavior, but short term on the one hand, longer term behavior, but less responsible in many cases. So that's the dichotomy that we have to deal with right now. For businesses that are publicly traded, I think the best way for them to start to behave more responsibly is not the debate on shareholder value or stakeholder value, because everybody understands, I think, by now that has really been around long enough, that the best way to build long-term shareholder value is to take care of all your stakeholders, as you say. But the best way is for these companies to help their leadership get out of their short-term behavior and their short-term compromise that actually undercuts their long-term success. The average tenure of a CEO right now of a publicly traded company is 4.5 years. The average length of a publicly traded company was 67 years when I was born. It's only 17 years now. I would argue we've created the wrong leaders. And part of this is undoubtedly a myopic focus on the short-term profits, with the pressures that they are. But ultimately, that's not an issue of technology or legislation or anything other than leadership and courage to do the right thing. When you read statistics that say 75% of CEOs or CFOs make the wrong short-term decision to make the quarter, knowing that it is actually not 100% in the interest of the long term of their companies, then that's a lack of leadership. Honestly, it's a lack of leadership. And so if there is a big deficit in society, including on the trust we're talking, it's actually a leadership deficit. And the best example of that you saw was this recent election in the US. How quickly CEOs switched from one opinion to the other, depending on the political outcome. How many were bending over to finance the inauguration campaign. How many started lobbying right away again to reduce environmental standards because it was easier shorter term to earn a little bit more money and play the game. So there, I think, many of the employees or many of the people in society got a real showing of where the real leaders are and where the fake leaders are, may I say so. And I think it ultimately gets translated into engagement in these companies, loyalty with customers and all that. So these CEOs with their behavior, what we're talking, I think are directly or indirectly undermining the long-term companies.
Yes. So you mentioned about family business. Family business, one generation, two generation, three generation, and hopefully it will goes on. I am not disagreeing with you, but there are two kind of family businesses. The mindset of the original founder is mercantilism. You make as much money as you can in your lifetime, and then your business may not be there, but you have a lot of money and then you do something else, right? So that's the mercantilism mindset. But what I'm saying is that if a family business, if that's the business you want to be, just like the Lever brothers when they started, right? I want to have this multi-generational and eventually it become an institution. So that's transformation is actually also not so easy in a family business. So some of the business, I wouldn't say most of the business, some of the family businesses, especially during the early of their inception, is mercantilism. I think there is discussion also in the startup community is that I want to create a startup and then I want to sell it, right? So that is a mercantilism mindset. Sure. So what I'm saying is that when a family business is wanting to do, and actually an institution, a company, a long-lasting companies, that would be, that then they are looking for long-term, although it is not transparently published, but at the bottom of the heart of the shareholders, I want to keep this for my grandchildren. I want to keep this to my great-grandchildren. This is legacy. So that's where the long-term mindset would play a role.
Oh, for sure. The long-term mindset will play a role. But where the link has to be made is, if people say, I start a business, and there are people in California, they just want to be a unicorn. I want to be a unicorn, or I want to exit in 5 years so that I have enough money to do whatever I want to do in life. And these people are there, but I'm not sure that they are the majority. I think the majority of people will say, how can I make myself useful and live my life with purpose? If it turns out that I earn money with that, I'm not ashamed of that. The Lord Lever actually never had money. Contrary to what people think, he was always bankrupt. Lord Lever was entirely driven by solving the issues of hygiene in Victorian Britain, where 1 out of 2 babies died in the first year. So he invented bar soap, which was called Lifebuoy or Sunlight, which happened to be very popular because he created a better smell, a better leather and all that, using palm oil and other things. And people bought it. But with the money he earned, actually, he built houses for his workers before the factories were running. He ensured that the communities had schooling and hospitals. In fact, Port Sunlight is still there as a model village in London, that in England, that close to Liverpool, that people love to live in. So the man always was thinking a little bit more about what he called shared prosperity. In fact, that was his slogan. He never really thought about the shareholder. In fact, he died in 1925. The company was bankrupt in 1929 because of the recession, merged with the Dutch Margarine Union, which was a cooperative of margarine makers, and became Unilever. It actually would not have survived Lord Lever by itself, I think, in the way that he ran the company. But he was entirely driven, I think, by a purpose, by a business problem he tried to solve. Doing that in a responsible way, but entirely driven by that. So if you have companies now that say, okay, I need to make as much money now and then decide how I spent the money, I always would have a discussion with them, and I would say, don't you want to know how you make your money? You know, we all want to have our multi-generations do well. I have children, I have grandchildren. So I don't have a family business, but I certainly want to live my life in a way that protects my children and my grandchildren. So for people that run companies, they should think the same way. But the interesting thing right now is we don't have to make it philosophical. If we would not do anything and we would project like we do currently to about 2.8 degrees, 2.9 degrees global warming, the cost to our global GDP would be $178 trillion. In Indonesia, you would have 4 to 6% of your GDP lost between now and 2030 on climate change. That's where the biggest challenge is to achieve your 8% growth. The challenge is not in saying I need this a little bit and there a little bit, or faster businesses, more transparency, attracting digital. No, the real challenge is to ensure that the planetary boundaries don't push you in the wrong direction. So if we, however, work together and stay around the 1.5 degrees warming, we would have a $43 trillion benefit. 178 trillion damage to our global economy, $43 trillion benefit. It's in that equation that a business person should get very excited. And it's happening. 80% of the investments that were made last year in energy expansion were in green energy. The green economy is growing it's now about $4 trillion. It's projected to be $15 trillion by 2030. All the global growth is there. So like any businessman, if you want to succeed long term, you position yourself where the growth is. You don't position yourself where the past is. You know, it's like this famous Canadian hockey player. You skate to where the puck is going. That's how you position your business. So you are daft, literally daft as a businessman, if you would not run your business in a more sustainable way or a more equitable way. In Unilever, I had a lot of decisions to take that cost money. For example, we had contingent labor on our payroll, like seasonal. But they weren't really seasonable, they were year-round, but it was easier to have seasonal labor. You find that especially in the agricultural sector. Well, I always ask myself a simple question like the golden rule, treat others and the planet as you would like to be treated. So would I like to be treated like that? Not knowing if I have a job, yet work for my whole life for a company, can be fired any day, don't have benefits like pensions? No, I don't want to. Just the same as if I don't want my wife to be in slave labor or my child to be in child labor or in sex trade. Well, if you don't want that, then you have to do everything in your powers, whatever position you're in, to prevent that from happening. I happened to run Unilever, so I did everything I could to prevent that in our value chain, because we were responsible for the total value chain. And what I found over and over and over again, that if we made these corrections, moved to livable wages, put all the people that were on contingent labor on our payroll, we found that immediately the results were higher quality, higher motivation, less attrition, that the financial equation was also better. It's like your example on waste. We had 562 factories when I was the CEO, and all over the world. So I said to my product supply guy, Pierluigi Sigismundi was his name, he came into my office. I said, we should not have zero waste. And so let's run all of our factories on zero waste. So he got a heart attack. So I had to lift him up from the floor, do CPR, bring him back to life. And he said, I cannot do it, or if you want to do it, it costs an enormous amount of money. I said, okay, there's no problem. Just calculate how much it would cost me or how long it would take you to do. Make a long story short, we did it in 3 years, and a lot of it is in the design stage, just designing with the right mindset, as you rightfully say. How do you design for things? We did it in 3 years. We saved about $400 million in year one right away, and over time, I think it ended up pretty quickly being $1 billion for the size of business that we are. Nature doesn't have any waste. Waste is a concept that humans have invented. So it's also, I think, fairly easy for human to uninvent it. And now that we have such a pressure on our scarce resources, on our planetary boundaries, it's not only becoming more urgent to do, but it's also becoming very profitable to do, including moving your business to circular thinking and all that. Now I recognize that you can't do 100%, you might be able to do 80%, but don't let the 20% hold the 80% hostage. Many companies conveniently use the 20% you can do today, competitive airline fuel or shipping or some of the high abatement categories, but don't hold that hostage to the 80%. That's really what we're trying to say in the book. Have people think regenerative, restorative, reparative, and it would be in all of our self-interest, to be honest.
So you are saying that to be sustainable, it actually not only it doesn't cost money, it can be profitable.
It should be profitable.
Yes, and also what you're saying is that to be socially responsible by eliminating or making your seasonal workers to be permanent, although there are times that when they don't have things to do, on the outset, it costs you money, but if you go deeper, it actually it's more profitable.
It's the power of system thinking. I was talking to the president yesterday. You give all the schools school meals.
I want to ask you, you met the president?
Yeah, so we spent time yesterday on, let's take school meals. You take school meals, then you saw Indonesia has one of the highest incidents of stunting. The cost of stunting to this society is 5 to 8% of your GDP. You talk 8% growth you want to have, solve your stunting to start with. So most of the people that live in poverty, in Indonesia, you have a number that's now 8%, slightly below 10%, but it really depends how you define poverty. I would argue the number is higher in reality if you know how people should be able to live. Most of that is with smallholder farmers. So if you link the school meal programs to helping farmers move to regenerative agriculture, provide services to these farmers to significantly increase their yield, their productivity, you not only make them climate proof, you not only provide more nutritious meals to the children in schools, these farmers will have higher income. They might be starting to pay tax, which easily compensates for the cost of these school meals. You get a productive workforce, you lift the communities up. These are systems changes. And if you only look at one silo, which we often do in business as well, or in government, if you only look at one silo, it always costs money. Because people don't say, it costs money in the beginning to get the factories to be adjusted to have zero waste. But the factories with zero waste, the first factories that we had with zero waste, we had better customer service, better product quality, higher motivated people because they were so proud. So that's the systems change that I'm arguing for. So you take in Indonesia now, you have your goal, which is the right goal, to be independent in your food. And you should be, a country like this, 280 million people, with the space you have, the land, the climate, you should be able to provide in your own food needs. But, you know, try to do that in a sustainable way. Try not to cut down more forests. Try to use your degraded land, which you have enough in Indonesia, and restore that. Then you save your forests. You use that for biodiversity credits at the same time. You become you pay farmers for farming biodiversity or soil health as much as they farm food. So you create ecosystems, if you want to, that are net positive. So if you look at it in individual silos, it never results in something that is a structural change. And what we now need more than ever in society is not to do the same thing over and over and expecting different results, but to drive these structural systems changes. That's why we also say it's very important for a net positive company to do two things beyond what they do themselves. Yourselves, you can do a lot by putting responsible business models in place, but you can only probably solve 30–40% of the real problem. So that's why we advocate that you work in partnerships, like you do in the IBC with 30 companies. It's a partnership. So that's the first thing. I cannot solve alone the issue of deforestation. I cannot solve alone the issue of plastics in the oceans. I cannot solve alone the issues of carbon in the atmosphere. But I certainly can put coalitions together to get to tipping points. So when companies or CEOs say, I cannot do this because then I'm at a disadvantage versus my competitors, or if I do it alone, I have a high cost and my competitors have a low cost, sort of the innovator's dilemma, I always ask them, but is it right to do or is it wrong to do? 99% of the time, the answer is it's right to do. I know we need that. Well, then do it together. Because if the future of humanity is at stake, we should have cooperative leadership, not competitive leadership. There's enough space to do competition. But increasingly, on these issues of humanity, we should work together. So that's area number one, to build trust with society. The other area to build trust is to, ultimately, business cannot do it alone. You have to do it together with governments. That's why I always see governments. And when I go there, I always ask, what can I do for you? I don't go there and say, lower my tax, or give me this concession, or here I will finance your political campaign, so you give me this or that. That's what undermines trust. What ultimately builds trust, if you go there and say, you have an issue of stunting, how can I help you do that and solve that? You don't get paid for your natural capital. How can we set up carbon markets, biodiversity markets, that we open up to other investors, foreign investors, that then provide financial flow that you desperately need? You try to find solutions to move a bigger picture forward. And that's what I call the difference between lobbying and positive advocacy. And I think companies will build trust with positive advocacy. They will undermine trust with lobbying, just like anything else. You know, it's the same in life. At the end of the day, it's about how we humans behave should be the same as how companies behave. Because at the end of the day, companies is an aggregation of human beings that make up these companies. I don't see it differently. So they are living beings. We've made them abstract for legal reasons to protect ourselves. And we sort of made them be run by computers, by numbers. But ultimately, you should run a company like we treat each other. And it's not different. And the ultimate form of leadership, also how you run these companies, I always say it arrives at the moment that you realize that by putting yourself to the service of others, you're also better off yourselves. So that's also how we should run our companies. Put the companies to the service of something bigger, realizing that by doing so, you're better off. And in Unilever, it resulted year after year in above industry growth, in above industry profits, above industry shareholder return. Ultimately, the shareholders were very happy with what we were doing.
So we only have a few minutes left. So it's great that you are able to meet the president yesterday. And IBC, Paul, is one of the mission is to make Indonesia more competitive. There are two ways to do this. One is we want to have a good dialogue with the government, like what you said, advocacy. Yeah. Secondly, is also we want to have exchanges of best practices so that we could elevate to be a better corporate citizen. So that's the two parts of making Indonesia more competitive. And so I just like to conclude that trust is very important. I think we all agree here. And without trust, the political scientists and economic scientists, Francis Fukuyama was saying that it's very hard to build prosperity without trust. And I think in Indonesia, as we want to grow, we need to build trust with the stakeholders. And how we build trust, I think I had some of your input just now, is to be more sustainable, to be socially responsible, take care of the stakeholders. In that way, we could become more responsible as a company. As a collective human, we could be more responsible. An organization that can be more responsible. And that way we could elevate our trust. And trust is a journey.
Yeah, you have to earn it. No, I think what you're doing is great, and I'm fully supportive of this, that I want you to succeed. And in some other countries that already exist. So if you have the right companies, you have now 30 or so, hopefully that grows, that set the right standards of what responsible business looks like. If you focus on the right agenda, where you look at the broader interest of Indonesia, which is in all of our interest, the government would be stupid not to make use of those resources. I would make that point very clear to the president. For any country to be functioning longer term, you need functioning institutions. They cannot work if the business community doesn't help strengthen these institutions. Many countries, business undermines these institutions. The second reason for the second driver for countries to work is a thriving middle class. Business are the ones that create these middle classes. So that's a responsibility, I think, where business would benefit from, but that we could do. And then the third one is to have a free press and a free, civil society and all these things. And again, even as Unilever, I got attacked many times by the Greenpeaces of this world, but I always supported them. Despite getting beaten up, because I'm a member of them, even if I may honestly say unashamedly, because I think that is such a critical part of society to make society function and stronger, that we should actually support that, even if it's sometimes not in our own short-term interest. So be it institutions, be it middle class, be it free press, business has a role to play to help strengthen that. And then your agenda is clear. So what you do with the IBC is not only applaudable, but it's absolutely needed. And here I would strongly advise the government to leverage that and to have that independent voice. But you have to earn it over time. I think your influence, as you say, will go up over the years as you not only talk the walk, but actually walk the walk. And that's...
Yes. So as you know, actually government and private sectors, we do have the same objective. We are at the same side of the coin. We want to make Indonesia prosper. I mean, with our ASEAN friend here, we want to say Indonesia and ASEAN to prosper. And with the prosperity, then we could have prosperity for all. So I think that's the whole concept of
Totally.
IBC.
I'm driven by a very simple thing, you know, that life doesn't work if we don't provide dignity and respect for everybody on this planet, if we don't have equity for anybody on this planet, and if we don't have compassion. If those three universal values are missing, the world doesn't function. So I remain optimistic and have hope because I see that these values are present in many places. So the more we could fight for that. I had the pleasure to work with President Yudhoyono, SBY, on developing the Sustainable Development Goals. He was part of a co-chair on an effort that we did for 3 or 4 years to develop these 17 goals, 169 targets. And it has a very simple objective, to irreversibly eradicate poverty and do that in a more sustainable and equitable way. In other words, not to leave anybody behind. It was valid when we did that and published that in 2015. All I can say, it's even more valid now, and that purpose that we have that opportunity to be the generation that actually solves poverty and solves these issues of climate or planetary boundaries. So I want to not disappoint my potential to be part of that. Otherwise, I have a hard time looking my children and grandchildren in the eye. You know, that's my multi-generational family business I care about.
Okay. Well, we can talk all days, Paul. I think there's so much to talk with you, and our time is up. I don't even offer any question from the floor. I'd like to say thank you very much for your insight, and please give Paul Polman a big applause.
Mr. Husodo Angkosubroto, thank you so much to have led the moderated session with Mr. Paul Polman. And of course, would like to have a gesture of gratitude. For this, we would like to invite CEO of IBC, Mr. Sofian Jalil, to present the token of appreciation to both the moderator and speaker. Once again, thank you very much, Mr. Paul Polman, for sharing your insights on the importance of trust. And also to Mr. Husodo Angkosubroto. And in this photo session, don't forget to smile. Gentlemen. Yeah.